Welcome, everybody. Tonight we have a very interesting discussion with Zhang Ga, who is a curator and a writer, and he has affiliations with this China Central Academy, otherwise known as CAFA, which is really the best art school in China. And Zhang Ga is both a colleague and a friend, and is particularly interested in media art, but is also very interested in the interconnections of the world scenarios as we become global. He has been a curator in many institutions, such as the Guangzhou Triennial, June Paik Art Center, is working with ZKM in Karlsruhe, which is a great art and technology museum. And he's also a writer. He has written books for MIT Press, October Magazine, Flash Art, and we are so lucky to have him this semester in our first semester of thesis, in which he is working with graduating seniors to raise the bar on their the ways that they deal with their ideas and their introduction to a professional status. So please join me in welcoming Zhang Ga for tonight.
Thanks to Jen for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me to teach this course this semester that allowed me to have another sort of, I used to teach at Parsons for many years, so this is since 5 years I've been not in contact with students in New York, so this allows me another opportunity to reconnect. And then I found my students are quite committed, and so that's great. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, let me share the screen for now. So I wear several hats. I'm a professor, so to speak, in art schools for many years, both in the States and in China since last 15 years in China too. And I'm also curator. In particular, as Suzanne said, I'm a media art curator. So my focus is on how technology influences the way how we conceive life and conceive reality, and how we respond to that. And I think when I was asked to do this lecture, and I was thinking, what is the right thing to do? Well, probably I wanted to talk about this project that I was working on and was supposed to open in 2020, February 18th at CAFA Art Museum, which is one of the it's one of the biggest shows that CAFA ever mounted. It's a new triennial series, and as you can know, this is the first tech casualty of coronavirus. So it had a big international repercussion about where how the pandemic affected China. At that time, it was not such a global thing yet. It was only China. So my show, it was the biggest show that was affected. So I think it's probably good to talk about this, and we'll still try to remount the show probably next year in the fall. And this is the inaugural show for a series of triennials that will take place at the CAFAM Art Museum, which is quite a good museum for a school, so to speak. The title of the show is called Topologies of the Real. So I wrote quite a lengthy curatorial text for the show. You know, I'm as I explained to Suzanne, that I'm not very good at an improviser in lecture. Apparently, I would be a very bad speaker for that type of talk. So I will read most from my text. I will try to be more entertaining, simultaneously. I hope so. I wanted to start with this quote from a German media theorist, Friedrich Kittler, and he says, "The arts, to employ an old word for an old institution, entertain only symbolic relation with the sensory fields they take for granted. On the contrary, media relate to the materiality with and on which they operate in the real itself." So I wanted to start with an anecdote. So in 2019, on my frequent long-haul flights from New York to Beijing for the preparation of the exhibition, it felt like a certain marketing company had bought exclusive rights to every on-demand movie and TV on the airplane for one of their cloud computing products named OX1. The ad features an angry Gordon Ramsay, who is a popular British chef, reprimanding one of his kitchen staff who seemed to pretending to be the chef himself, making his signature risotto dish. The ad was so repetitive that it began to sink into my subconsciousness as a humming noise, which said, "Don't compromise on anything less than the real thing." So this became very revealing as I was going to write this text. You know? Big data and risotto, the virtual must source the physical for accreditation. The real demands its authenticity. But in today's dubious circumstances in which the genuine and the simulacra are easily interchangeable, and the virtual and the physical often reciprocal, such liminal facts have immediately complicated an unassuming notion of the real. What is real insofar as the real is concerned? The quantum physicist Carol Rovelli attributes the roots of modern scientific study of reality to the atomicists of the pre-Socratic Greek philosophy that would ultimately give birth to quantum mechanics 2 millennia later. At the very beginning, there was a division already that set apart a realist outlook of the notion of the real from the idealist concept of reality, in which reality was a mind construct rather than a substance with physical extension in time and space. Plato's reality was the world outside the cave, while the chained slaves could only indulge in the shadow of their ignorant self-projections. Plato saw the real hidden in the abstraction of a perfect mathematical forms that underlay the phenomenal world. The real was there, if not entirely unattainable. It could only be pursued through penetrating behind the facade of the empirical world as we know it. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant's idealism presupposed that time and space were a priori to the perceiving mind. Historian Stephen Kern, in his book, The Culture of Time and Space, 1880 to 1918, argued that technological advances transformed the subjective and private concept of time to that of a universal one. He wrote, quote, "The use of telegraph subjects the whole of the globe to the observation of civilized communities and leaves no internal interval of time between widely separated places proportionate to their distances apart, end quote. The global electronic network didn't, in fact, begin with the internet as we know it today, but already emerged with the collapse of the independence of local times. In the past, there were all these regional times. In 1870, the United States alone had 80 railroad time zones. All we become 24 hours as international Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, that's for the facility of the communication and a globalized village already back then. If telegraph of the 19th century and its inhuman speed foreshadow the inevitable collapse of time and the erasure of distance in the near future, then the mid-20th century saw a decisive turning point when acceleration had grown at an extremely fast pace to sabotage the very notion of reality. If, according to the Kantian a priori, the time-space substrate provides the basis for human perception and reasoning, the 1960s fascination with time took place during a moment when time suddenly picked up to an exponential speed, throwing the body as well as the mind out of the psychic orbit of a comfort zone. The existential anxiety may well be symptomized by the paradigm shift from the machine age to an information age, indicated by the advent of the computational technologies. It is a profound alienation resulting from the disappearance of an analog culture. The coming of age of a digital culture marked binary fluidity and elasticity, which was at once a simulacra and a verisimilitude of every possible thing that at the same time bore no intrinsic material resemblance to anything nameable. In the words of a French philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, quote, "It is the rise of situations to which one can no longer react, of environments with which there are not only chance relations, of empty or disconnected any space whatever's, replacing qualified extended space, to the extent that there is no longer any linkage of the real with imaginary, but indiscernibility of the two, a perpetual exchange," end quote. The Deleuzean time image concept most elegantly captures such momentum in question. So the exhibition was divided into three parts. The first part is titled Reality Interrupted. When time no longer presents itself as a stream of a continuum of past, present, and future, when space unfolds itself no more as a qualified extended space, instead as the juxtaposition of infinitely near and far simultaneously, commingling the physical with the virtual. It is the speed that collapses distance and time, compressing the temporal and spatial to a flat plane of immanence, to quote a Deleuzean idea. This quasi disorientation is the most powerful sensation that overwhelms and subdues us. Indeed, a sense of a chronophobia permeated the 1960s, as art historian Pamela Lee has illuminated in her book, Chronophobia on Time in the Art of the 1960s. Chronophobia means fear of time. She wrote, quote, "Cutting across movements, mediums, and genres, the chronophobia impulse suggests an insistent struggle with time, the will of both artists and critics to master its passage, to still its acceleration, or to give forms to its changing condition," end quote. Invoking historian Reinhard Koslick's characterization of late modernity as being a peculiar form of acceleration, she also heeded to, quote, "the radical attenuation of the model due to computer technologies of the 60s, with this rhetoric of speed and seemingly instantaneous information processing, end quote. So in this regard, this exhibition, Topologies of the Real, may well begin with Li's insight as a prelude to unpack some of the artistic positions, eager to grapple with the temporal and spatial disruption and the reconfiguration evidenced in the mid-20th century until the turn of the millennium, and of course, onward in an ever faster acceleration. While the 60s saw numerous political upheavals and social unrest, often manifested in radical gestures against the prevailing social orders. The artistic endeavors reflecting the flux of changes largely followed a politics of a formal revolution. Among many experiments of the period, expanded cinema, for example, and the early video works of performative nature could be seen as consistent attempts to investigate the rapidly evolving notion of time and its spatial figuration, thereby in the formalist guise, upending the institutional norms and bureaucratic hierarchy. Long before the virtue became today's everyday given, Peter Weibel had set out to confront the monopoly of one-way communication. So TV is always, in the past, is a one-way communication. You have the TV station sending out signals and we receive it, right? His 1969 classic work, Endless Sandwich, was a serial event disturbing the industrial protocol that had perpetuated the television network. TV signal interferences here trigger the action of the viewer to again interfere, to remedy interference. A series of uncannily sandwiched happenings ripple through the virtual to the real. See what happens. So something's happening, something went wrong in one of the first screens in the movie. So this guy stands up, try to fix the TV set. And then the second one, try to fix that interference. And now the third one, still in the movie image. And then we come back to the real life. So a series of uncannily sandwiched happenings ripple through the virtual to the real, suspending the apparatus, yet stimulating an event for afterthought. One of the typical strategies of the period can be found in dislocated spatial orientation enacted through technologically manipulated temporality, recording and delayed playback in a closed circuit environment. This technique allowed the observer to assume the role of being observed, shifting from a viewer to a performer as an indispensable reciprocal part of the work. Audience participation became an inherent qualification of the meaning production of an artwork. The process of estrangement opened one to a new sensual awakening. It was the politics of the presence that underwrote its radicality. Dan Graham's Present Continuous Past, which is 1974 work, is an exemplary work in which two present times intersecting and juxtaposing create an infinite regress of past embedded within the present. The mirror wall reflects what is happening at the moment. The camera records the mirrored wall, which reflects the camera recording. The monitor plays back the recording with an 8 seconds delay. The reflected monitor in the mirrored wall shows the recording in yet 8 seconds times lapse. The rendering of past into the present activates a reversal process that defies our received perception of temporality. Among the pioneers from the mid-century to the dawn of the new millennium, many have taken the spatial and the temporal as their point of departure to investigate the real under a technologically augmented condition. As early as 1968, Zhang Ga invited Marcel Duchamp to stage a chess game in which improvised electronic music slowly revealed to gradually turn single scores into a chorus of randomness as chess pieces were eliminated one by one over the course of the game. So this chessboard is electronically wired. In the beginning, there were musicians playing electronic instruments connected to the chessboard. Because it's all muted. Only when one chess is taken away, moved away, and the sound is revealed. So as more chess pieces are removed from the chessboard, more sounds are appearing. So it becomes, in the end, the chorus of a concert. Yeah. So that's setting the precedent for a technologically enhanced participatory work of art. Michael Snow filmed a ghostly apartment with an elongated temporal extension simultaneously fascinating and excruciating in his seminal work, Wavelengths. This is a classic piece. I encourage everybody who's interested to look at it, watch it. It can easily be found on YouTube. It's a 45 long movie. This is a very quickly edited snippet. Hans Hacker blue cell engaged with the most basic technical apparatus, an electric fan, to achieve a poetics of everyday, transfixing a moment of ephemera into a lasting memory of culture and nature. In Bruce Conner's monumental work, Crossroads, the artist reconstructed an epic vision of ultimate destruction in which an extremely slow motion version of a nuclear explosion rendered a silent horror into an audible echo in the mind, eliciting recollection of the inhuman skill of modernity. Other artists created works evocative of estranging experiences foreign to common sense. In her 1984 installation, Model for Stage and Screen, Judith Barry submerged her audience in hallucinating after image created by a staged wonder chamber. Zhang Ga documented a traffic intersection, refilmed the same footage 8 times successively, resulting in 1 more degree of distortion each time, turning the focal distance into an abstract image of ambiguity. So the 8 images at the last one is completely an abstract image. Jim Campbell's homage to Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty. This piece called Shadow for Heisenberg. In its flickering shadow of our inability to grasp the real. Contrary to the common sense, the closer you approach the object, the blurrier it became. This was a 1994 work. Wang Gongxing is another Chinese artist. This is the dialogue between a hypnotically swinging light bulb and the surface of a slightly overflowing pool of water, exhibited a delicate and a precarious encounter of the 2 elements, almost meeting each other, nonetheless evading each other after all. Indeed, the last 4 decades of the 20th century was haunted by a profound anxiety deeply ingrained in the fear of losing a grip on the real, in the loss of ownership of the tangible and the accountable, and in the desperate longing to hold back a fleeing time which was ever more retrogressing than progressing. Such chronophobia of caprice finally found its scathing certainty in a catastrophic image of the fall of the Twin Towers. Incidentally, and yet presciently caught by the unrelenting gaze of a webcam of the new millennium. So this is Wolfgang Stieler's work, which he uses a webcam to document a sort of a time-elapsed images. And he was having a show at the Postmasters Gallery at the time, so he was mounting two cameras to look at Brooklyn Bridge. And by incident, he documented the entire event of 9/11. Wolfgang Stieler's Untitled incidentally documented the tragic unfolding of the collapse of the World Trade Center, marked abrupt closure of the reality of the 20th century and the beginning of a new era. So this part is the first part of the exhibition. Yeah. So it has a historical overview of the last since the mid-60s up to 2000. Then we go into the second part, the digital era. Datumsoria, the return of the real. The art historian Hal Foster wrote in 1996, summarized art since the 1970s as an outcry for the return of the real. The real, as he contended, would be the actual bodies and the social size, recognized in the form of the traumatic and the abject subject. He commented, quote, "The shift in conception from reality as an effect of representation to the real as a thing of trauma may be definitive in contemporary art," end quote. In other words, contemporary art came into being as a rejection of both the pictorial real and illusionistic surreal, and as a rehabilitation of the signifying power of imagery. Most recently, in Bad New Days, published in 2015, Foster again resuscitated his rubrics for art from the past 25 years, characterizing it as either abject, archival, mimetic, precarious, or question-marked post-critical. By reiterating a set of terms resonating with his earlier book, Foster recalibrated his search for the real under the current condition of global capitalism proselytized by the neoliberalism. There have been abundant reflections on the world domination brought about by the digital revolution, which saw its first inkling in the last decade of the 20th century. 1993 was the year when the first graphic web browser, Mosaic, made its public debut. That marked coming of the age of the internet, making the long-promised information superhighway a material reality. That's fulfilling a world picture in bitmaps and pixelation. Along with it came the ubiquitous proliferation of the binary codes that underline all digital communications technologies. These ones and zeros are the new building blocks of a contemporary digital pre-module, which gives rise to a generic reality. So this part is about what constitutes our current reality, which is a generic real. The generic real is a digital virtual whose binary mode of operation can assume all analog information and thereby actualizing materiality. That is to say, insofar as data is concerned, there is no difference and differentiation between a video file and a Word doc, or between a sound clip or a pie chart. At the most foundational level, there are simply numerical notations of non-specificity, actuated through electromagnetic pulses of ons and offs. the crude data packets that originate in the digital can be transmitted by various protocols and assembled into whatever medium is desired at the other end of the pipeline. They are inherently malleable and transformational. The generic is therefore not a deprivation of meaning, impoverishment of sensibility, or dilapidation of originality. On the contrary, the generic in the form of digitality is the new clean slate out of which materiality is inscribed, a condition in which morphogenesis takes place and ambiguity obtains crystallization and emotive emergences begins to erupt. The generic as generative. In this work, The Weight of Insomnia, Liu Xiaodong, he's a well-established painter, developed an automated system that uses streaming data and computer vision algorithms to continuously paint a canvas for the entire duration of the exhibition. The autonomous and performative painting is simultaneously peculiar and engrossing. It is as if the robot, reincarnated in a human consciousness, wrestles through an endless, restless insomnia to piece together an ever-evolving jigsaw of amorphous desires and anxieties, fleeting nightmares and raptures. Lin Hirschman Leeson had already intuited the inkling of an era characterized by the newly found culture and economic capital in data packets. Her networked sculpture, Sincere Stock Ticker, that's made in 2000, impersonating distinctive moods which fluctuated with real-time stock market trading data by internet, amusingly portraying the new economy of a new era. By the same token, Bradford Paley, in his code profiles, elegantly visualize the intricacies of the data flow at runtime, revealing the inner working of the digital codes. Joe D brought to life a browsing sensation by clicking through a sequence of URLs, commemorating an internet of the 1990s, where chaos and freedom once reigned. This is a MoMA installation. In the original format, it was only on a desktop. Now it's become this very spectacle that in the MoMA reinstallation of the piece in 2017 when MoMA reopened. Here's a work by Jenny Hauser. Also, Jenny Hauser also got an update of her infamous truism in the digital age. She started work on the truism, and that's her very famous work. But she turned it into a digital. We see this epigram turned into data streams scrolling over an LED beam to release the subversive pleasure ever more relevant to the era of social media. Harold Miazza's live feeds of Instagram via VPN alludes to a complex exchange of artifacts by which we have learned that knowledge sharing is never wishfully innocent. The conceptual artist Yan Lei, on the other hand, in his massive installation Reverie Reset, uses machine learning to evaluate images caught from the internet as well as from live feed, averaging them into approximate color planes and textual descriptions. Therefore, questioning conceptualism's core idea of the power of signifying, making aware that in the age of internet and artificial intelligence, the production of meaning is as complex as it is unstable and can sometimes be precarious. John Kessler, in his playful whim, deceives us in an immersion of seeing and being seen. At every angle is an excess of juxtaposition, superposition, and transposition. We find the flavor of Orwellian totality in this analog mechanism foreshadowing the all-weather digital data panopticon in which escape has become futile. So if Liu Xiaodong's nightmarish burden can be seen as a data incarnation of the emotional state of the artist, then Jean Girard's deadpan rendition of the immense Google data center, quite matter-of-factly called farm, as these places are often nicknamed data farms, carries a weight that is more profound than that of a personal agony. It is a sketch of the global network that drives world domination in eerily slow motion. Girard also makes it clear that the virtual is no less unreal than the real because it feeds on fossil fuel as its provisions. So this is a huge thing hovering in the air, which is called quarterly, an instance of many works in the name of Wang Yuyang hashtag. Artist Wang Yuyang designed a software toolkit that was able to conceive and produce artworks on its own accord. Through numerous and distinct iterations, Wang Yuyang hashtag has constructed a paradigm by which intelligence and creativity are no longer a human privilege only, in reversing the creative operation from the human artist to the otherwise subservient tubing of the machine. Wang Yuyang hashtag has not only offered us a wealth of stunningly novel forms in sculpture, painting, and performances, but also forced us to think anew a world in which the perception of the real can no longer be reduced to that of human consciousness alone, a reality in which the production of knowledge becomes a reciprocal exchange between subject and object, between human and non-human. So, Datumsoria, the return of the real. Datumsoria is a neologism derived from datum and sensoria. Signifies a new conceptual space which is imminent to the information age. It reveals the logic of the new real, a reality predicated on the virtual force of the binary impulse, of the generic ones and the zeros from which leaps forward a hardening of shapes and forms. The real against all likelihoods of the real as an effect of representation, or the real as the surreal, is virtuality disguised. The real is the generic as the generative. It is the principle of emergence and creation. June Paik had dreamed about technological betterment in the service of the human good and loaded all in the elephant cart. If only his electronic futurism were a romantic signpost and a symbolic gesture of what yet to come. Datumsoria attests to the formidable presence of a planetary membrane of the network that has forever changed the rules of the game in work and play, in politics and economics. Datumsoria also signals that the politics of the real no longer only lies in the sphere of the actual bodies and the social sides recognized in the form of dramatic and abject subject, as Hal Foster once claimed, as the predominant subject of contemporary experience and object of artistic inquiry, but also alludes to how grasping this new reality of bits and bytes is as ethically imperative as it is epistemologically fundamental. The last part of the show is titled Multiverse, Ecology Without Nature. Modern physics speculation on the multiverse begins with quantum mechanics, originating in the proposition of a quantum wave theory, which would explain the paradoxical phenomenon as discovered in the infamous double-slit experiment. The wave-particle duality not only substantiates the uncertainty principle and invokes the probability claim that undergirds the core of quantum reality, but also sheds light on the theory of parallel worlds and multiple universes. From Thomas Young's 1801 experiment of light passing through two slits to reveal the wave nature of light, contesting the Newtonian doctrine of light's particular property, to firing electrons in subsequent tests, resulting in the receptive screens with a surprising revelation of waves collapsing once again into particles. The double slit experiments have disclosed the matter's inherent nature of self-interference and exposed the enigmatic quantum entanglement of superposition of multiple states simultaneously, revealing that the physical events can undergo an infinite number of equally likely trajectories. The double slit experiments gave rise to the hypothesis of the notion of a reality vastly different from our empirical knowledge. If much of our inherited concept of reality roots in space and time as a conscient a priori of pure intuition, science today refutes that space and time are the bedrock upon which the universe unfolds its material extension. Theoretical physicist Carol Rovelli suggests that time and space are particles that constitute quantum gravity and are the synonym of matter and energy itself. This new conception of reality indicates that matter and energy, space and time are all encompassed into a cohesive and reciprocal oneness. After all, time and space are technical existence by way of measuring instruments, as the physicist Brian Greene points out, quote, a measurement is just one collection of particles. A person is also part of a particle, the equipment, the computer, coming into contact with another, the particle or particle being measured. Derived of their unique place in the world, humans in this regard are on equal footing with everything else in the composition of space-time. Humans are space-time itself, not beneficiaries of space-time. In other words, since the world at its core is made of particles of minute scale, which sets it free from anthropocentric arbitrariness, according to quantum physics mechanics. The fact that a measuring device or mind simultaneously experiencing distinctive realities is a physical condition at the quantum scale, which in Hugh Everett's many words approach of quantum physics states that, quote, everything that is possible quantum mechanically speaking is realized in its own separate world. The implication of quantum realities in the cosmic order thus introduces many parallel worlds in an infinite repetition of cosmic horizon. These mind-boggling conjectures, as well as fanciful hypotheses, nevertheless provide radical visions that are inspiring to rethink our immediate reality. The immediacy and the fluxes of the real are its many possibilities, many alternatives, many symbioses and ecologies, many worlds and universes of different natures and constituents. Insofar as multiverse ecologies without nature in this exhibition is concerned, it underscores a condition of a post-object and post-humanity, of which Kerry Wolf gives a succinct account. It comes both before and after humanism. Before in the sense that it names the embodiment and the embeddedness of the human being in not just as its biological, but also its technological world. The prosthetic co-evolution of the human animal with the technicity of truth and external archival mechanism. It comes after in the sense that it names a historical moment in which the decentering of human by its imbrication in technical, medical, informatic, and economic networks is increasingly impossible to ignore. The post-human world is a multiverse of subjects emerging to claim their birthrights in the uproars of the particles encapsulating energized space-time. In these parallel time spaces, in between the cosmological horizons, humanity's laughs and cries, machine mumbles and chirps, cultural myth and anomalies, self-styled artificial intelligence and bio-eccentrics are all making their own worlds of the real, their habitats of survival and triumph. Ecology without nature is first of all the desolation of nature. Through the portholes of shipwreck in altitude 0, artist Wu Jieming let us feel the impact of waste and the trash in one's face. While Marina Zhukov, in her animation Slurp, envisions an unnerving reality where human and animal hybrids, as well as the debris of the surroundings, come together and wave a dystopian narrative that unfurls an undercurrent of mesmerizing tensions. What is it like when greenhouse effects and acid rain dominate Mother Earth? Anna Dimitri and Alex May make growing under the deep sea a testbed for future humanity. This is the robot living in the deep sea. Harold Miyaza, on the other hand, in the work of Too Many Lings, uses solar power to render sound and light as its main source of energy for the nourishment of lings. That's a medicinal mushroom found in Asia that is believed to extend longevity, as if it is the cure for a dilapidated Gaia. There are also uncanny worlds. Thomas Feuenstein grows meat from brain cells and a large amount of philosophy. The processor sculpture pancreas transforms books into sugar that nourishes human brain cells. The book's paper is shredded, soaked in water, and processed into an artificial intestine in which bacteria break down the cellulose into glucose. The glucose is supplied to the cells growing inside a glass tank, which houses the brain. The artificial brain is fed according to a strict diet. The brain food consists exclusively of Hegel's phenomenon of spirit. In Mechanism of Life, the symbiotic collective invokes a poetic imagery of emergence of life in the form of a protocell that is a blob of a primordial impulse to grow, eventually surrendering to entropy and dissolving into a murky liquid, much like life. There are fantastical words of the kind Mike Kelly's Condor would best illustrate. The birthplace of a Superman is outwardly nostalgic and a reminiscence of his heroic escape from the planet Krypton. Alex DeCotta and Jason Mossam create a lengthy video work shuffling through a flurry of actions in the mundane everyday of American consumerist world. In Paradise on Earth, artist Zhou Xiaohu, in his mechanized marionettes, celebrates a caricature of Zhuangzi's old Chinese philosopher's philosophy, mixed with the carnivals of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delight. It is a world of humans, animals, fairies, machines, of moods, deeds, and actions. We see a scrolling text that reads out the following message. The AI technology used to predict the future is hidden inside this video, end quote. Here, Hedo's style portrays a mesmerizing daydream in which to unfold a contemplation on technology, power, corruption, and warfare that characterize today's business as usual. Unlike employing a Google machine learning algorithm to train data sets as the way to create an AI work. Philip Perano hand-drawn fireflies showed reverse. Complicated patterns emerged from simple rules. Inspired by the game of life, a grade-based cellular automation developed by British mathematician John Conway, with a rhythmic instinction to be able to travel through beyond existing forces of life. That's the title of the work. Cycles through life and death, chance and indeterminacy, revealing the very fragility of digital life. In Mikko Asel's retro-futurist world in which scientific progress is questioned by the obsolescence of technology, there are noises of motors and generators, gaseous smells and smoky vapors, disclosing the electrophysical and the chemical interactions fundamental to natural forces. Zhu Wenkai creates a binary landscape that has infinite possibilities of mutation and change, while in pilot wave induction, the artist Toba Auerbach restaged a physics experiment in which a silicon droplet mysteriously bounces on its own wave in a vibrating speaker, illustrating a bizarre wave-particle relationship. The artwork is a manifestation of the artist's fascination in revealing, quote, new spectral and dimensional richness, both within and beyond the limits of perception. This is another alternative reality to the probability-driven quantum universe. In his 1999 book, HeK Techne, Art and Technology from the Machine Age to the Posthuman, R.L. Rusky intuited a new definition for the Greek word techne, which is conventionally translated as art, skill, and craft. He thinks that a new type of techne, growing out of the unprecedented technological acceleration of late capitalism, has mutated from modern technology's instrumental rationality and utility into a sentient self-awareness of technological agency, manifested in its cultural desires and aesthetic imaginations of the techne itself. As I mentioned earlier, this new mutation and transformation is the result of a transition from the analog machine age to a digital information age. Humanity in relation to this techno culture, unconscious, according to Rusky, cannot be that of an analyst or theorist who, standing outside this space, presumes to know or control it. It must instead be a relation of a connection to, of interaction with that which has been seen as other. To accept this relation is to let go of part of what has meant to be human, to be a human subject, and to allow ourselves to change, to mutate, to become alien, cyber, post-human. At a time when the 1960s phobia of time seems to have given way to the ecstasy of simultaneity of the millennium, signaling a transformation from chronophobia, which is the fear of time, to chronophilia, which is love of time, when distance appears no longer an impediment to immediacy. The unfolding of the topologies of the real is the coming to pass of the truth of technological reality that consumes the virtual and the actual indiscriminately. In the 1960s, art critic Leo Steinberg wrote passionately in his seminal anthology, Other Criteria, Confrontations with the 20th Century Art, in defense of the then young and recalcitrant Jasper Johns, who was often dismissed as a renegade from the abstract expressionist mainstream. Confrontations with art and the world at large in the 21st century now demand yet another criteria for concept of the real, insofar as the real in question is concerned. The arts that have since inscribed piquant impressions on our sensory fields in the likes of object, precarious, may be recalibrated to register the generic and the virtual as new qualifiers for generation and signification, actuated by whatever media may be deemed necessary. Indeed, don't compromise on anything less than the real. If only we bear in mind that the real is amorphous and transient, like the capricious particles gushing through the double slit, landing in juxtaposing places both infinitely far and near of a vastly expanded space-time of many worlds. Thank you. So that was my talk. I hope it's not too long and wordy.
No, that was terrific. That was terrific, Zhang Ga. I think that you encapsulated many years of history into a very succinct phase. And you touched upon many of the issues, even going back to Plato's cave, in which the real and the shadow were having a conversation. And I think that many of our viewers and our audience tonight come into the technological world as a ready-made. Okay, they're born into it, as opposed to evolving through it like our predecessors who had access to technology, say, during the 1960s. So the attitude of mind, in a way, is something that is quite different from other generations. I also think that your discussion really brings us to some of the words of Marshall Mcluhan, who was a prophet, who essentially talked about the world being a global village. And now we are able to separate space and time, first through collage mechanisms initially in the 20th century, and then now in the cut and paste techniques that the digital universe has allowed us to. And this, in my opinion, transforms everything from data, transforms everything into data, from the human body to the prices in the stock market. So I don't think we have yet figured out as a culture how the new information age, which is upon us, is how we integrate that into our ethical system and the way we live our lives. But those are just some comments from me. I'd like to open this up. Evan, are you around anywhere? If you can.
Yes, we don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, if anyone has any questions,
Okay.
feel free to enter them.
Fine. Can we change the screen? Great. Okay. No questions yet, but there will be some. I think also, Zhang Ga, as you were talking about the conflation between the real and the simulacra, we've been talking about this for a long time with theorists like Baudrillard, for example, or science fiction writers like Margaret Atwood, or even going back in time to H.G. Wells. So it appears as if we are living in between fictions and the real, almost like the electrons, which are kind of like a wave and a particle, that this sense of uncertainty is about the ways in which change cannot be predicted. So do you want to talk a little bit more about how one may address this information age in which we are now in, and how we can adjust to it, both artistically and personally?
Well, I wanted to see this show actually. Let me fall back a little bit. Okay, so I started to do I was asked to do a big show at the National Art Museum of China in 2008 for as part of a Cultural Olympics. It was a very big exhibition. So in that show, I laid out 4 domains, which I consider that constitute or sort of capture the zeitgeist of the times. And the title of the show is called Synthetic Times. So there's one area, the 4 parts. One part is called Beyond the Body. So it deals with how technology extended the human physical body, right? And the other is called the recombinant reality, about how reality, the notion of reality has transformed under the technological time space. And then there's one called emotive digital, how technology brings life to everyday objects. And there is another one called here, then, everywhere. Yeah, so that's sort of invocative of Beatles' sound, that meaning network. It's a networked society. So after that, in 2011, I did a sequel show called Trans Life. So that was so that 4 area was sort of a earlier inquiry into the 4 big domains. And in 2014, I did another show. So that at that time, the National Art Museum turned this thing into a triennial. So I was asked to do the show again, and I named the show Trans Life. So it was going deeper into beyond the body to question the nature of body life. So it was the early foray into this exploration about post-human. So this has been the origin of that trajectory. In 2014, I took that year's topic as thing world. So it's another way to explore the notion of emotive digital, to bring into a discussion of a multitudes of subjectivities that emerging as word makers, right? So it's mostly my notion of curatorial practice through the last 15 years is centered on the post-human conception of art making, and I think it's a particularly relevant in the media art field, because the technology has the capacity to enliven immobile objects. Media art creates this mobility and movements, and that is symptomatic of living organism. So in that case, so it brings that still immobile objects into the state of mobility, and that is the first inkling of a sign of life. So that is a very easy entry to for the media artist to come into terms with the post-human discussion. And the post-human discussion also has very much to do with the technological condition. I think this was already mentioned in Lyotard's postmodern condition.
That's right.
What he mentioned as a foundational condition for postmodern is the technological condition, but somehow this part of interpretation was never picked up by the artwork, by the cultural understanding of the postmodern. So I think the post-human started from the postmodern. There was really no postmodern, because the paradigm shift started already there. After modernity represents humanism. After modernity will be the post-human. After humanism is post-human. So in that case, this is a paradigm shift already beginning at the turn of the notion of postmodernism. So we are still, we have entered the post-human long before we came to acknowledging it. And then we are slowly come to be aware that this is the world of a post-human world. And this is mostly my curatorial sort of the conceptual underpinning of my curatorial trajectory, for the last 15 years.
That's a very good explanation of the post-human, as opposed to we're not human anymore. Okay, it's that it goes beyond modernity, like postmodernism did in this sensibility. I think also there are some questions here. Evan, if you would like to read them.
Sure. Our first one is someone who's asking if you could re-explain the Peter Weibel endless sandwich. They had missed the beginning of your explanation.
Okay. So it is, I can actually play the movie back again if that helps to see it better. So let's just watch this one more time so you can see what actually happened. So a person is watching a TV, a person is watching TV inside the TV inside the TV. So it's like a sandwiched action. And then there's an interference happening in the first TV set. So the person starts to get up. Not yet. Okay. So there's interference. So this person gets up and try to fix it. And it gets even worse. And then he gets up and try to fix it. So it's from the virtual, from the screen, comes back to the real. So finally it reaches to the last TV set. So that's sort of like a ripple effect from the virtual to the real. Yeah. Does it help?
Yes, thank you. Our next one, which of the works resonates with you the most?
I can't really answer that question because I think I like many of, I mean, all of them I like very much. I think they are very much important to a very particular area of investigation. So, I mean, I wouldn't say which one resonate with me the best. I mean, I think they all resonate with me quite, you know, effectively.
And another one from one of our students. As a curator, what ends up being your biggest challenge while curating a successful show?
I think it has, well, I think you have to think very hard to try to understand what is the most pressing issue that you wanted to address, to raise issues and to address issues. And then you have to, I mean, in the beginning was only a concept, an idea. Yeah. So how do you turn an idea into a physical manifestation? It's a very long process. You know, you need to do a tremendous amount of research, and you of course have to reach out to artists, and you of course you also already have a pool of artists that you work with, and you with new ideas, concepts, you have to explore more artists working in the field that you want to tap into the show as a to illuminate what you try to come across. And then of course you have logistic challenges, you know, budget, space, you know, all of this come to help you or creating more problems for the realization of your concept or your ideas. So it has many factors that playing for you know achieving a successful realization of a show. And it also depends on the scale, because sometimes I've done this many big scale shows, you know, involving hundreds of artists. That's not one thing very different from to deal with a dozen artists or a few artists. So it's different degrees of challenges and ways to deal with it.
Great. I think that's our last question.
Okay, then I think I have one more question, which has to do with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the ways in which different countries are approaching this. And clearly this is a sign of the future as machines or digital machines become integrated into society. Certainly in China, there's been a lot of talk that China is very advanced in this kind of technology as compared to other countries. Can you sort of talk a little bit about the benefits of AI and the non-benefits of AI?
Well, interestingly enough, I just recently did 2 shows about AI. I've sort of stayed away from AI because it was so hyped up. You know, I'm usually not quite into this hyper things, you know, so I try to keep my distance for the longest time. Finally, I said I should do something about AI because it was too much of a sensation everywhere, you know. So I did a show which actually questioned the validity of AI as it is and AI art. You know, I mean, the show is called AI Delivered, Abject, and Redemption. So the first part is it's a two-part exhibition. The first part is try to reconsider AI as an overly how do you call it? That the humans, that us, right, projected too much of our own intelligence onto the machine and try to have machine emulate our intelligence. And so to achieve that human brain capacity is the ultimate goal of AI research. And that historically from the AI research is a failed attempt. So, and it's never epistemologically, also biologically, it's impossible. So many experts in the field already pointed out that is an unsound sort of a conception to think in that term. So the first part of my show is try to address that, so to point out the failure of AI rather than to celebrate AI. The second part is try to think about AI as something completely different from independent of human intelligence, as an intelligence of its own order, of another order, right? So this is also tied into the post-human discussion, because the post-human discussion fundamentally is not so much about the extension of human capacity, but rather a acknowledgement of multiple subjects, a coexistence with many other beings. So it's a symbiotic sort of ecology. That's the core of a post-human discussion. So this part is try to imagine, or actually there are many artists working in that kind of direction, try to bring AI into a equal dialogue with humans, but not as an emulation of human intelligence or as something to subject to human will, vice versa. So these are the two things I think to look at AI beyond the current sort of corporate hyped sort of conception of AI, because there are a lot of geopolitical and economic sort of agenda at play with the current AI hype. In particular, China, yes, China is extremely supportive of AI research, and then there are a flurry of shows about AI everywhere in China. And I actually turned a few shows down because I didn't want to get involved with this sort of a single-minded or totally uncritical embrace of AI technology. And I don't think AI is going to overtake humanity, but I also don't think that AI is harmless. I think this all depending on how you see that, the way how you deal with it, from which perspective, and then what kind of relationship you wanted to establish with technology in general, because AI is just one kind of technologies. It's basically computer programming. It's an algorithm. It's a particular type of algorithm. In the end, is how you deal with technology in general. What's your attitude towards technology? You see technology as an alien force, as a kind of a dominant force, or as a subservient force, or is it a master-slave relationship, or is it an equal kind of a conversation? So these are the things that really very much fall into the discussion of the things I was trying to articulate in the shows and in my writings too.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that this was a terrific conversation, and one that points to the future, which we will all be part of. So Zhang Ga, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Good night.